book. All right. Got the book. Yay. Exciting story. But first, let me introduce you, those of you who have not met Pete before. He is joining us live from Australia, so we're happy that he got up early this morning, and he's early tomorrow morning for us.
Wow.
And is joining us. So that is really wonderful. We're so happy to have him. And for those of you who were at the Reincarnation Symposium, if your feet haven't touched the ground yet because of his presentation, I totally understand. It was absolutely fantastic. And I love, Pete was the one who suggested the topic of expanding consciousness. And I think that's so appropriate for where we are at this day and age. Besides the book that we're going to be talking about now, he also wrote Quantum Consciousness Journey Through Other Realms. And he was the president of the Michael Newton Institute. He's on the board still. And he's the founder of the Institute of Quantum Consciousness. So in the new book, his character, so this is a fiction book, but weaves in everything that he talks about in quantum consciousness and more, and into this beautiful mystery, love story, healing story. And if any of you have read Celestine Prophecy, I really feel like this book takes Celestine Prophecy to way other levels, weaving in all of this expansion of consciousness. So Peter is going to talk a little bit about Kelly, Celeste Kelly, who is the protagonist in the movie. I mean, oh, whoa! I hope that's
There's a Freudian slip if ever I heard one.
Yeah, precognition, I hope. I was thinking about that earlier today when Pat and I were talking. That just makes me so happy. So Celeste Kelly's the protagonist in this movie. And there, I did it again. Okay, that must mean some good things. And Tiffany has joined us. Good to see you, Tiffany. And what I love about this story is that you never know where it's going to go. And it, for me, it left me wanting. I feel like, okay, what's the sequel? Because you leave with some questions unanswered, which I think is a really good thing. And they're just the right questions. A lot of questions were answered, both from a scientific perspective, a metaphysical perspective, a total skeptical perspective. And so without any further ado, I want to turn it over to Peter with this question. What in the world inspired you to write this story?
I guess I'm wondering as well whether everybody's read the book or whether I'm going to spoil the plot or how I'm doing here, but it's a bit hard to do a reincarnation book club if you're not going to sort of talk a bit about the plot. So I'll try to leave enough gaps in there that not to spoil a read of it if you haven't had a chance to read the book yet. I wrote Quantum Consciousness best part of 10 years ago now, the first version of it. And then it got picked up in 2018 by Llewellyn Publishing. And they took it on. I self-published originally. And then I thought, it's time for another book. So last year I sat down and I said, I've got to try and write this book. And I'm trying to write this book. I'm trying to write this book. It just wouldn't come. And if you know anything about books or bringing messages from the other side or whatever it is, they just flow. So my dear partner, Melina, she made a suggestion to me because I'd written some Facebook posts that are a couple of years back now about snapshots from the future. And someone was saying, hey, I'm in 2056 and the world's amazing and this is what's happened to the medical system. Or they've said, this is what's happened to the economics of the world, or this is how we've restored the planet. So there was like these postcards from the future sort of thing. And she said, well, you wrote those things on Facebook and they were better than anything else you've ever put on Facebook. Not that I'm not sure if that was a compliment or not. But she said, why don't you try your hand at fiction? So I sat with it and I thought, yeah, well, how would I do this? Because a lot of our work over the years has been the mix between the spiritual pieces of science. And we all know, because we're here and we're talking about it, that, science and spirituality have been knocking on the door of each other for a long time, particularly the stuff by the Institute of Noetic Sciences and Organisation HeartMath Institute. All of these amazing places have been bridging science and spirituality for decades. But when you put consciousness into the mix, everything gets absorbed into consciousness, because consciousness is everything. So it covers the whole landscape. So my challenge was to write a book about a scientist that went spiritual. And what she did was she started to explore, and she's got a very strong scientific brain. And I had a corporate career where I was very much head-based for about 20 years when I started my working life. So I'm familiar with that mindset, and my own evolution into spirituality had a different mindset. So this was an opportunity to try and bring the two together. And a lot of the research, I did a lot of research into quantum physics. I did a lot, and my own personal experiences came through as well. And it gradually came together. And if you know the book, you'll know that Celeste Kelly, when she does thinking, she does this big wall of paper and she maps it all out and all that sort of stuff. Well, that's me. That's how I write a book. And I took over the whole hallway in the house. And I'm glad that the hallway wasn't any longer, because the book would have been twice as long, because I would have kept going. But, when you can stand back from a wall of paper and you can observe your whole thought process, they start to make sense. And I could look at a wall and see the plot, and I'd come back and I'd fix things and I'd change things and all that. But this is a really long answer to Carol's first question. But I want to say at the end of that I didn't write this book alone. And I think that spirit was very present. In fact, I had a couple of sessions that, if you talk me into it, I'll probably share and disclose a little more than I should about some of that. But there's something in this that is about it's time for a book like this to arrive, and it has messages that go beyond me, and I might have been at the keyboard, but there was so much more going on. So that's what inspired me to write the book. I just surrendered to what was happening for me, and the book emerged.
I love that answer. And now you've got our interest completely piqued by share those experiences.
So I had, there's a psychic I know, and she's a really good one. And I can't tell you who it is because it's a client confidentiality thing. And she had a session with me. And we're out there and we're surfing the universe in the quantum realms. And she said to me, there's some people here and they're for you. And I said, okay. And I usually step right back from that, because it's not my day, it's their day. And she says, no, it's a really important message. There's a group of quantum physicists from the other side, and they have information they want you to bring through. And if I didn't know this person and know their integrity and their credibility, I would have probably said, yeah, maybe. But I said, oh, okay. And that was enough to sort of whet my appetite. And then I went and had my own session with somebody that I trust, and I toured, and I got a sense of going to another lifetime where I actually was sitting in a class at a big university, and I was in the back row, and I was listening to Albert Einstein do a lecture. So this was actually a past life snapshot of mine where he was a teacher. Now, there's a story that emerges in the book about Celeste has a past life as someone who gets to meet Einstein. And it's actually based on a real circumstance where I was at the back corner of a lecture, and then I went researching when Einstein came to Princeton 10 years before he emigrated to the US. And I researched all into how that happened, the lecture that he gave, and it connected with the past life vision that I'd had at that time. And I connected that as a real story into the book. And I embellish it, of course, because that's what you do. You find some truth and you find a way to communicate it that gets the message across at another level. So there's a little acknowledgement in the back of the book about somebody who put me in touch with my quantum helpers, and that's what that refers to.
I think that is awesome. And, you know, it makes me wonder what we could accomplish when we connect with these people who have done the quantum physics and other expansive approaches to life. What could happen for us by contacting these people? And so I think you're onto something.
I feel that there is a time that we're in now where the veil is very thin. And I think that there is an incredible amount of support for us that comes from beyond this particular 3D dimension that we're in. And I feel that's everywhere. And I see it so often in sessions. In fact, can I read a quote from the book? If you've read the book, you'll know that there's this guy called Bob that turns up, interdimensional Bob, who's like a bit of a guide, helper, whatever it is, and his complete connection emerges in time. If you've read the book, you know what I mean. But Bob says at one point in their conversations when he's in contact with Celeste in meditation, humanity is at a crossroads and will soon move through a period of transformation as you learn more about yourselves and your place in the universe. One of the things you will discover is that much of humanity's potential has been limited at both the individual and collective levels. These limitations were installed in most of the systems on the planet. Those of us from elsewhere have been watching for a long time, waiting for this moment, and it has now arrived. You are entering a time of profound discovery, and we are supporting your efforts with great love. Not all are ready for change, and it will not be an easy road, though the support for these changes comes from all corners of the universe. Now, paragraphs such as that one is the sort of thing I've been hearing for years from clients as they talk about their helpers who are supporting them and where they're coming from. And I know that we see a lot of distress in the world, but I feel that everything, bursts into flames just before the phoenix rises. And I feel these are the times that we're in. We all came here deliberately to be part of it, and we all have a role to play. And whether your role is just holding loving space for family, whether it's to be part of these changes, whether it's to have a simple conversation that awakens someone up to there's so much more to them than they are. And I know many of you are in the healing arts as well, and that is sacred work when you help people understand who they really are. So I guess at the end of that, all I can say is thanks for coming. Thanks for being here in these times, because that was a choice, a courageous one. So good on you.
I so agree. And I also agree with the concept that all the chaos that we seem to be experiencing is, it has purpose. And in Chinese, I love the character for chaos includes the radical opportunity. And so that's the way I look at all of the chaos that our world is facing. And so when I ask what my job is, oftentimes it is about holding the energy of unconditional love for everyone to move through this chaos to what we're meant to be.
Yeah. Beautiful. That's it, Carol. There's a t-shirt right there.
Yeah. And I love how in this book and in your work, you talk about how we are remembering our magnificence. I never thought of myself as magnificent until reading your book. And so I have to confess it's taken me a while to embrace that big of a word, but I love that you plant the seeds for us to do that.
What I love about what you just said, Carol, is that you came to that realization by yourself. So I could have offered to tell you that a few months ago and save you reading the book, but it's not the same as discovering it for yourself. And I think if there's any gift that we can ever give it, it's to say that, hey, when you look in the mirror in the morning, you're looking at a human disguise. That's not who you are. But it's a very carefully chosen disguise out of 8 billion options that were available. So it's an important decision. It's a valuable decision, but it's not who you are. And if we can help anyone just break the shackles on our conditioning that this is it, we're this three-dimensional being and that's all. But everybody has out-of-body experiences, dream states. Everybody's had some contact with the metaphysical at some point, but our conditioning tries to hide it under the covers. But the covers are coming off now, and everyone's understanding that there's so much more to us. So, and this is part of my role of having to surrender, being a therapist, a hypnotherapist, all of these things on the way through. If you want to be a true facilitator of consciousness, then you work in a landscape without boundaries, and you can only work in a philosophy of service. That's all we have. And when we work in a philosophy of service and we take people on journeys into their consciousness, then, if you try and put a label on there, I'm a something, then you're actually limiting what you can offer to the people who come. So, I favor, the universe is limitless. We're part of the universe, so we must also be limitless. That just makes logical sense. So let's get on with being limitless and moving beyond these systems and these cultures and these behaviors that are keeping us trapped in this simulation. And let's explore our magnificence, because it's already there. We just have to remember.
Beautiful. Someone asked me about a word that you use over and over in the book. So I want to quote a little what you wrote about it on page 309, if anybody wants to know. And you say, we don't just observe the universe, we shape it, and it responds to our every whim. So tell us a little bit more about the observer effect.
Quantum physics is well documented on the observer effect, that they found that with the double slit experiment, and most people have heard of that. So without going into too much technical detail, and you can research that to your heart's content, and it'll take you a week to find all the pieces. But basically, they came to understand that if somebody is observing an experiment, they intrude upon it. There's no such thing as objectivity. If we observe something, then we are affecting our reality and its reality, and we shape it towards what we're doing. If you expect particles to behave as a wave, they will. If you expect them to be treated as individual particles, they will. And this moves into things that we've all seen through, that old movie, The Secret, Power of Intention. So many people have talked about these things. And we used to say that seeing is believing, but it's actually the other way around. Because if you believe it, then you'll see it, because technically you create it. Now, if I walk out my door this morning and I go for a walk and I intend to have an awesome morning walk, I have one. But if I want to walk out my door and carry all of my troubles of the world with me and continually process them around in my head, and it's difficult times at the moment. It's energy flying in all directions, both globally and also, with many of us individually. And I've got lots of family members in distress. So we can carry that with us, and we make the choice. Do you want to be the shadow, or do you want to be the light? And I've got to tell you, if you choose to be the light and go on a walk, you come back even lighter than when you embarked. So for me, we make choices about our energy field, and underneath some of the concepts of this book is that the true power of the universe is actually our free will. And when we choose and we engage our observer effect, it becomes the creator effect, because we create the scenarios around ourselves. You tend to find that pessimists have very sad lives and optimists have pretty cool lives, because it all comes down to how we take our energy out into the world, and that echoes back to us in what we see and how we feel about it. So for me, the universe responding to who we are is summarized as that. If you want a good life, just go have one. You'll have challenges, and our soul develops and learns and grows from those challenges. We all have challenges in human form. None of us are here for a holiday. It's a tough gig being on Earth. But, the question that you can ask yourself in those difficult times is, what is my soul trying to teach me? How does this help me to evolve and grow? And will I pass through the fire? And will I learn what I came here to learn through this experience? Thank you for the lesson, which we probably created before we came here.
So true. Does anyone else have a question that they would love to ask? I'm gonna, I guess, raise your hand and let me know if there's a question online.
And drop something into the chat box if you want to.
Yeah, do that way if you're more comfortable that way. And while we're waiting for questions from the audience, tell us a little bit more about the research project that Celeste and her group put together. I think that's such an intriguing thing. Was that built on anything from real life?
You're talking about the Designing Our Destiny project, when they get those snippets from the future?
No,
even
before that, when they were beginning to explore I don't think it was called that in the beginning, if I remember correctly. They were just beginning to explore these different things, and I think that's what the DoD came out of.
So there's Project Shed, and then there was Project Dodd. Okay. Well, that happened when Celeste realized that when you take somebody out of their body and you have what's the equivalent of more of an out of body, or even it's more similar to a near-death experience, and anything, except your consciousness is available in the body as well. She realized when people came out of their bodies and they looked back at the bodies, they could find their own answers. So she started to run an experiment, because she was charged with the responsibility in her PhD of trying to find the other dimensions that people talk about in like M theory, which is the amalgamation string theory, or some of the other ones that are put together in the most beautiful way. So she went looking for the scientific background behind the many worlds interpretation of string theory, and discovered this other dimension where we could lift people into in order to get the answers that they seek. What that opened was deep and profound healing for people that no one could understand. It was like those medical anomalies where somebody has a spontaneous healing and they sort of write it off as saying, we don't know what happens, so we'll just stick with the old system. So this, because she was not part of an indoctrinated system and she was a pure scientist, she said, well, these results are significant and they're different and they shouldn't be happening. So let's chase them and let's find them. So she put an ad in the local paper, who wants to be part of an experiment, and people came from everywhere wanting to be part of this thing that she was building, and they were quite overwhelmed at one point with the amount of support that they got. So what she did was she scientifically mapped consciousness and came up with a model that she said, well, using the observer effect, the people can observe their own bodies and their own selves, but then something happens, and she christened that the super observer effect, which is, for those of us who are in the know, in the light worker movement, you would see that as higher self, super consciousness, soul type observation. But their consciousness included both the body and that piece. So she ran a whole series of experiments, and in the process helped thousands of people. And then she couldn't be ignored by the powers that be in the medical system and all of that were quite affronted by her being so successful in a quantum physics project. And that's an important part of the plot, that you have to move outside the system to change the system.
Beautiful. And then that leads to the destiny
Yeah.
of no,
Designing our destiny.
designing our destiny. Yeah. I
Yeah.
was missing a word there.
Yeah, well, they had an interesting experiment where somebody moved outside their body and was talking to them from a future year. And she thought, well, that's a little weird because they are moving outside of time and space as part of what they're doing. They're moving outside time and space, but this person's speaking from a place where they're only 25 years old and the year is 2072, something like that. So how can that be? And they ask the person, and the person says, well, I'm the body, I'm the next incarnation of that expanded self. So then she realizes she's got a working model for reincarnation that's scientifically proven. So then she starts to leverage that with the next thing. She says, well, let's go into the future and let's talk to these people and let's find out what's happening there. And when they ask questions about what's life like, and they get all sorts of different conjectures and feedback, and this is what's happening, this is what's happening. But when they started to publish the positive stories out on their social media and all that, because I've got about 1 million followers for their Institute for Quantum Metaphysics at this stage, they start to collapse timelines into this one positive high vibrational scenario. And they're knocking off the multiverse and they're channeling all of these positive stories. As people read them and believe them, they're letting go of all the lesser timelines and they're just leading humanity into one positive future that becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. So they're actually molding and shaping the multiverse to be able to, if you like, create the future that humanity most needs. And it comes across in, in your medical system and your leadership system, the restoration of the planet through one political system that's global, no longer boundaries between countries and all that sort of stuff, just respect for the local cultural aspects that need to be preserved, but two groups that work together, the planetary advocates and the people ambassadors. So they find out what's best for the people and what's best for the planet in this collaboration of a new leadership model for Earth. So these are the sort of things that they start to pull out of the future and collapse the other options into these ones. So if you like, they've created a time loop about, how do we build a positive future for humanity? Well, we create it through our super observer effects. And at the same time, they come up with a scientific working model for reincarnation.
Awesome. So can you explain a little bit more about what you mean by collapsing the timeline?
Okay, sure. And you can ask 100 different people who are into quantum physics and I'll give you 100 different answers, but I'll offer you mine on the basis that you need to find your own model, but I'll offer you what I've come up with. Because if I don't, then that doesn't fit the whole concept of the multiverse anyway. Everyone has to have their own model because it's a multiverse. So we all have our own, and we might have many between us. So my take is that whenever we make a decision, we split into two timelines. We went that way and we went that way. And a lot of the research that we've done at the Institute for Quantum Consciousness is we've been mapping these alternate realities for over a decade. And we've been taking people on journeys to meet the other them that went the other timeline. Now, the reason we can do that is because, first of all, we create an intention to do so. There's our observer effect / creator effect. And we are quantumly entangled with them because we came from the same set of subatomic particles before we split. Now, these alternate realities are actually closer than what people see as past lives, or as I call them, parallel lives, because the synchronicities between the subatomic particles are closer because they've come from one body before it split. So quantum entanglement is very, at a high level. So it's easy to tap into the other realities. Now we go in and we make all these little decisions and we all have lives and the multiverse continues to unfold in terms of the original concept put forward originally in 1957. But I won't go into the history of that. I did all that at the Reincarnation Symposium. But what happens is we all make these individual, and collectively humanity shifts in certain directions through these multiverses with all of the different versions of us that are there. Now, we're not always going to make good choices. We're going to make bad choices. In fact, humanity is very famous for its bad choices. We do war, and we do poverty, and we do greed, and we do materialism. We make a lot of lower vibrational decisions when we could be making higher ones. What they mined in the future was they were looking for versions of the client in their next incarnation that came from a positive world. And when they started to pull the positive stories out and they fertilized them here, they were making the other timelines dissolve because the lower vibrational ones were no longer in the line of sight. So if you have a positive future, it's like a vision setting. It's like a vision board. Most of us have done vision boards over the years, or we've set goals in our life. You focus on the goal and you tend to turn up there. So by taking these positive stories and publishing them globally, everyone got enrolled in the stories and started to create this new world that was happening, taking us away from the lesser options. So the timelines that were going to take us in the wrong direction started to dissolve because people were inspired by the new direction that we were building. This, I mean, for me and for all the research I've done, this actually makes logical, scientific, philosophical sense. Can't say it can be proven as a scientific theory. I can't say that if you took this into any of the big universities around the world, they'd probably think I was completely nuts for floating the notion. But if you sat down with somebody who's a true believer in quantum physics and a true follower of the multiverse and string theory and the other dimensions, you would have a really interesting conversation with them. They wouldn't be able to rule it out because it fits with their methodology and the philosophy behind their theories.
That's wonderful. And it seems to me as if you're changing the future by even observing it. You're shortening the time between the future and the current is what I'm seeing.
Yeah. Well, time's an illusion. We all know that.
I love it. I absolutely love that.
Yeah, I mean, we all, we say time's an illusion. And if I go back to the regression work that we were talking about before, Carol, that we think's a little more out of fashion these days. And remember, when I started as a hypnotherapist 20 years ago, I'd take someone to trauma when they were 5 and they'd be expressing the trauma of the 5-year-old. You take someone to another lifetime, and what we used to see as past life work. We go there and, someone's writhing around on the bottom of the Colosseum while they're getting eaten by a lion. And they're tossing and turning and, quite distressed in the chair. I mean, this is 2,000 years ago. But, they're still experiencing in the here and now. So what really is time? Einstein's theory of relativity makes perfect sense. When you get to a black hole, time slows down. There's a distortion. And we've all had times where time seemed to have stretched when you're somewhere where you don't want to be. And then you've seen that amazing movie that's over before you start. So, time is more malleable than what we know. Einstein went so far as to call it an illusion. It's more in the way that we think time and space rather than in the way the universe actually works. And it's time for us to realize that we are physical, people, physical disguises in a metaphysical environment. Once we realize that we're not really physical, we're metaphysical, we can work in that environment and do things that we didn't think we could do otherwise. We're connected with other people. Human consciousness is something that surrounds the landscape of Earth as a whole other layer. We can tune into the Earth consciousness. We can tune into the consciousness of humanity. I mean, nothing is separate. And it's time for us to realize that's who we are and how we can explore that for the good of humanity. And when there's conflict in other parts of the world, and we all know about that now, we're at war with ourselves. And it's time for us to realize that if we can create peace within consciousness as well and be peaceful with ourselves. So, the times of some of those bad decisions are over. Humanity needs to move ahead in new ways.
Exactly. Wow. And I look at the world situation as a mirror of the collective consciousness, showing us those places where we are looking at the shadow. And by looking at the shadow and peeling that away, that we reveal the light. So it's just a different way of looking at these things. And you sort of go in that direction in the 5 themes at the end of the book. I don't want to go there yet. I want to save that. But can you can you talk a little bit about the super observer and how it relates to group regression, group meditation, or group experience?
There's some reasonably well-known research called the Maharishi effect. And people talk about this in other books, Greg Braden, Lynn McTabbert. Lynn McTabbert has, she talked about it, I think, in The Field, that book. She's published things like the intention experiment, etc. And a whole group of people, I think they did this, Philadelphia, I think, was one of the cities that they chose, but a whole group of people meditating significantly lowered the crime rate for the period through which they were meditating. They meditated on peace, and they sent peace into the collective environment of a major city in the US. And they did this in a number of different ways. And, it's something I haven't looked at for a while, so the exact detail is a little more fuzzy. But it was christened the Maharishi effect. And for us to understand that when we put our energy fields together and we seek a higher purpose behind that connection that we all take, we can change the world. And I think it was the Dalai Lama who said, if you want peace in the next generation, teach every 8-year-old on the planet to meditate, and we'll have peace within one generation. And I love that, because he's echoing something that does exist. I mean, there's a lot of work that's been done on this, and Greg Braden himself talks about, and he and others, they talk about this square root of 1% to kickstart consciousness. The square root of 1% of 8 billion people is only about 8,000 people working together to kickstart a change in consciousness. We're well ahead of that. So the consciousness shift has already started, and it's picking up speed and momentum. But when we meditate and we expand our energy fields, whether it's Celeste's experiments in the book, whether it's us when we meditate, whether it's when we leave our bodies at night, when we move out into that greater consciousness, we can accomplish so much more. And when we're out there, we connect with others. When we're in body, you hold somebody's hand and you connect with them. But when we're out in our expanded states and we join into one wave of consciousness, then that's where we can really change humanity. It's not so much about what we do in body, it's what we do beyond the body, knowing that we are beyond the body, that can really change the world. There's things we need to do in human form as well. But when we hold a greater intention in a collective consciousness, that's when true change occurs.
Beautiful. So coming back to the designing our destiny, I was going to ask if you are currently doing some of that in your present work, but I also noticed on your website that you have the 2028 project. Are they connected?
Yes. There's a story.
That's
You
more
want the
about
story?
that? Yeah.
About 4 years ago, I sat down, I think it was 2019, 2020, something like that. I sat at my computer and I said, if I was a time traveler and I was coming from 2028 and the world was a better place, what would I want to travel back in time and tell the people? So I shot about a 7-minute videos say, you know, hi, I'm coming here from 2028, et cetera, et cetera. And I put forward these different themes. Anyway, I put it out there in a few different places and it went nuts and people loved it. And I talked about the new leadership system I mentioned before, how we had the planetary ambassadors and the people advocates, or the other way around, whichever one it was. I talked about how all the billionaires had to donate half of their wealth to world restoration projects. I talked about how the medical system had changed, that the drug companies were no longer around apart from critical pharmaceuticals for medical, but most people were doing the alternative health approaches now with a little bit of allopathic medicine that still helped. So I put forward a whole number of themes and I published some of that and people loved it. People liked it so much that I created discussion materials and put them on the website under 2028 Here Comes the Light as a program where people can download discussion and they have a person who runs the discussion, a convener, and they have these 5 different conversations that they can have with people over 5 separate weeks. We've come into a workshop situation, and 5 groups, they all work together. And I put them all out there for free and people could download them and they started to have the conversations. So in a way, I was starting to do what Celeste was starting to do in the book, except I started early and that's where the idea came from. So people were starting to have conversations of a different type of earth, of a higher vibrational state of being. And I was getting good feedback from people saying, hey, we had the conversation about the new leadership paradigm or the new medical paradigm or the new technology paradigm with no wireless. The concept for technology in the future is that we connect our thought forms to a computer and you don't even need a keyboard anymore. And we just think the words onto the screen through our own observer effect. And because everyone's connected out into the knowledge of all there is, we don't need an internet. There's just one big telepathic consciousness that we all tune into to get the answers that we need for anything. I'm not sure this is a good outcome for Google, but everybody just gets the information that you think a question and the answer comes because everyone's connected into a greater consciousness. So these were the sort of ideas that I started to float and people just loved it. So yeah, the discussion materials are still out there if anyone wants to access them and play around with them. I put it forward as this is the replacement for the old Tupperware party or something like that. You can have a consciousness party instead, and you can have these different themes that people can tune into and work with.
I love it. And that's kind of what we're doing with the Reincarnation Book Club is, dangling consciousness carrots in front of people to explore. We're all at different levels of seeking and of knowledge, so that we have this group where we can share these ideas and talk openly without fear of being condemned is so important. And I'm really feeling the call, that this one of the reasons why I created the Reincarnation Symposium 4 years ago was that call to bring this work into mainstream.
Yeah, and I'm so glad that you have, Carol, because the ripple of this stuff. I mean, you never know how many people are going to watch a video of something, even if they I missed that. In the old days, a radio program. I missed the radio program. But now you're giving eternal life to any of these conversations, and they're still out there for people to listen to weeks, months, or even years later. And they come to that piece of information when they're ready. And the beauty of that, and one thing I want to say to everybody who's either here or watching, don't worry about where you're at.
Right.
Just keep going. I mean, there was a time when I didn't believe in any of this stuff.
Yeah, you were a banker at one time, right?
Yeah, I'm a reformed banking executive, for goodness sake. So, you couldn't get much further apart from this stuff than 23 years in banking from an early age. So, I mean, for me, being set free from that environment, I had to understand, I talk about the systems that are based on, control and greed and materialism and that sort of power and that sort of stuff and control. the reason that I speak so openly about that stuff is because I've been part of those systems in my old career, and I saw the banking system from the inside, and I thought, this is just wrong. And, but without going down that rabbit hole, because it's not the high vibrational one, but there's something here about we have to see the things that we wish to transcend. And this is not the world that we want. What do we want to create that's diametrically opposed to the issues that humanity face? And like I said at the symposium, we've got systems that are built on, greed and control and fear and all of that. And we just need to say, no, we're not doing that. We're going to build a better world. And here's how we step out and we start to do it. And it's all about our observer effect, our creator effect. What is the world that we want to envisage? How do we bring it into being? Whether it's about reading a book, whether it's having conversation, whatever we want it to be. But there's so much waiting for us. And we have the power to make it happen.
Absolutely. So I was looking at my questions that I had, in an early question I forgot to ask you. Throughout the book, you use the word meta connected with several different things. So could you explain that for people who might not be so familiar with that terminology?
Yeah, well, first thing I want to say, it has absolutely nothing to do with Facebook. Okay, so I'll say that up front.
Yes.
But for me, meta is beyond.
Yeah.
It's the metaphysical. We're not physical, we're metaphysical. Had so many clients say to me over the years, I just want to know that I'm normal. I say, well, I'm very sorry, but you're actually paranormal. And normal is usually somebody's idea of how you should be as they try to impress their system onto you. So you're not normal. No, I'm just not your normal. So we're either paranormal or supernormal. That's it. And we've got to get over that, because that's who we are. Okay, there is no normal. Okay, so normal is usually a system that you have to comply with. So express your normality or your paranormality to your heart's content. So for me, meta is something that goes beyond. We're not physical, we're metaphysical. There's science and there's meta science. That's another term that I use in the book. Meta science, we need to return to true science. Science was originally put in place as an exploratory landscape without bias in any direction. Okay, that's what true science does. People say follow the science. It's actually follow the doctrine when they use that term. So for me, true science is the trailblazing exploration of things that serve humanity and take us further. And we shouldn't leave no stone unturned. And when something amazing happens, we got to chase that, not write it off as an outlier. Okay. Spontaneous healings. How did that happen? How did Anita Moorjani, who wrote that great book, Dying to Be Me, how did she get rid of the tumours in her body the size of lemons? Why is she not being studied? But they kept her in hospital for 3 weeks trying to work out how that could have happened when it wasn't right, rather than hold her up as an example for others to follow. So but it got her to write a book, and it's a great book. But for me, meta is something that comes beyond. How do we take science to meta science? How do we take the physical into the metaphysical, multi as well? How do we take the universe into the multiverse? This is the stretching of our consciousness and the stretching of humanity's potential into new avenues of endeavour, into new places, new landscapes, new horizons. We should be pushing the boundaries of who we are into the metaphysical and leaving the physical behind, because we've stuffed up the physical. We haven't got a great world. And that's because we've been facing the physical and forgetting that we are the metaphysical. The answers for us lie within the greatness that we're yet to remember for ourselves and discover for the good of the world. And that's where we really need to head. And that's what this book's about. It's about helping us understand what is the untapped potential within the human condition that we also should be pursuing. And for me, and it's been quite a challenge moving from a non-fiction author to a fictional author. Fortunately, I had a good editor that beat me about the head continually trying to get me out of nonfiction and into fictional writing. And I'm grateful to AIA Publishing for doing that for me. But it's about me catching a new segment where if you tell a story, and we've learned through stories, you know, Indigenous cultures across the history of humanity have kept their culture intact through stories. Stories teach. So by telling a story, you can teach in ways differently than what a non-fiction book will. And a lot of the stuff in the Transcendence of Celeste Kelly, a lot of it's about my personal journey of the people that I've worked with over the years as well. And it's about the work that we're rippling out to the world. And I can see 3 of my buddies who are doing the work here with Sharon and Lee and Kim in the audience. So, I mean, this is the sort of stuff that we want to do. We want to help people understand, start to question who they are. This isn't it. This isn't who I am. I'm so much more, and it's time to find out. And then when I know more about that, I can share that with others, and we can all join this wave of consciousness, because it's much more fun when you're a wave than rather just a particle. These particles join a wave and we all head in the same direction and we bring big change.
Something you said just then made me wonder about the difference between the multiverse and parallel universes. What are your thoughts about that?
Well, parallel universes and alternate realities are sometimes interchanged. And if you take alternate realities and you add the multiverse to them, they're probably parallel universes. So for me, the question is it an alternate reality, or is it a parallel universe, or is it a parallel life? Okay, so my definition, and again, everyone really needs to find their own to try and save confusion. My definition in our work of alternate realities are other versions of, say, Pete that exist in other timelines. Okay, so there's Pete over here, Pete went a different direction, Pete went in a different direction. If I can use that analogy I shared with you before we came on to the recording, Carol. You go to the department store and you want to buy some new clothes, and you take them into the change room, and on your left and on your right are 2 mirrors. And you stand at a certain angle and you look into those mirrors where they bounce the light off each other, and it looks like limitless versions of you in each direction. Okay, so that's my definition of the alternate realities. Okay. Parallel lives for me is the concept of reincarnation outside of time and space, where my soul is in other versions of other bodies that I've selected to learn different lessons in that particular place across time and space. So for me, parallel lives is past lives outside of time. So if we look at parallel universes, some people will call that, from the alternate realities, these other versions of might be out there doing different things to me. People may call those parallel universes, or they may call them alternate realities. That's almost interchangeable in most popular culture. If we want to talk about the multiverse itself, that's just the big kahuna. That's everything, the whole enchilada, if you like. The multiverse is everything. There's no multiverses because it's already plural, because it includes everything. I tried to make it a bit easier to avoid confusion. I just call it the all there is. There's other versions of Pete, there's other versions of me in other lifetimes here on Earth, and there's other versions of me that may be in other types of bodies or on other planets. And we call that the realm of interdimensional consciousness. So when I do the work with our model, we have the realm of alternate consciousness, parallel consciousness, and interdimensional consciousness, meaning other versions of Pete, Pete in other bodies, and Pete in things that may not need a body. So that might have confused people further, but...
Okay, so now I want to come back to the 5 themes that you talk about in the last part of the book. And so cleaner technology was theme number 1. I really related to the part that you said in that about low EMFs, because I actually experienced EMF disorder.
Yeah.
I was affected, and it affected me so much that it affected my immune system. Like you've heard about the children who live too close to the
the power lines and that sort of thing.
power lines,
Yeah.
exactly. Yeah. And then 2 was quantum networking, asking a question into the field, and then the universe goes to work to bring the answers, right? Then you talk about meta science. So I wasn't exactly sure about what you meant by meta science, but I think maybe you answered that. But come back and say something a little bit more about that.
I've sort of started these off a little bit in discussion, but let me expand a little bit. Without going into all the intricacies of 5G technology and all of that, and how that's EMF's being ramped up in lots of different ways. With the moving away from EMF, the whole idea of wireless technology is to transfer information over an infrastructure that's wireless sending and receiving. When you have a different way to access that information through a collective consciousness, then you can retire all the EMF networks. Okay, so when we move into the group technology, and this really works with the quantum networking stuff as well. They talk about the quantum computers, and when code that's written in binary is either a 1 or a 0, that's how they do the old coding. So it's either 1 or it's either 0. So it's one or the other. But in quantum computing, supposedly and I'm not an expert in any of this stuff, but supposedly the code stays in its superposition, so it's limitless. So it's not bound by the 1 or the 0. So it can process limitless amounts of information in a short space of time because it's not limited by the 1 or 0 code. So the quantum networking and the cleaner tech go together in that the overall environment based on collective consciousness, if we're connected almost telepathically into a field of information, and through computers as well, you think you connect with your computer and you ask a question and you just read the answer on the screen without use of a keyboard. So it's based on group consciousness and telepathy, which retires the EMF network, because you no longer need wireless because everyone's already tuned into everything. And let's face it, advanced civilizations on other planets use telepathy as their language anyway. No one uses one of those Babel fish from, Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy that they stick in their ear, if you know the book. They use telepathy, and that's how all the other advanced races in the universe, I shouldn't call them the other advanced races because I'm not sure we're one of them, but the other races that are supporting our shift are really using telepathy. We know that because that's how people can channel. So that whole cleaner tech and quantum networking means that we fundamentally look at technology in a different way that allows us to get away from plugs and boxes and equipment and just into the quantum field where all the information sits anyway. You could argue that the internet's a subset of the quantum field anyway. So why don't we just go for the field? So that's sort of that first piece. Meta science is really, if you like, a restoration of the true scientific principle of being a trailblazer, an investigator, and a searcher for answers without being held back by influence and agendas. I sort of talked a little bit about this before, but meta science is about opening to the metaphysical. Okay, a little bit what some of those organisations like IARS and Institute of Noetic Sciences and HeartMath Institute, Monroe Institute, Michael Newton Institute. A lot of these organisations are doing research that is using scientific principles but taking them into the metaphysical instead of just the physical. So meta science is a coming together of the physical and the metaphysical into one branch of knowledge pursuit. The leadership, it's an end of politics. How do we feel about an end to politics? and that we move into two groups of people who champion the causes for the planet, but collaborate under a joint collaboration that is for the greater good. And you've got the planetary advocates and the people ambassadors. What's good for the people and what's good for the planet. And there's a dissolving of the first and the third world because there's enough wealth to go around. I mean, the top 1% on this planet own something in excess of, I don't know, 80 or 90% of the wealth or something. I mean, we're talking about a redistribution that allows everybody to have all of their needs met and to actually have a fantastic standard of living that exceeds most of what people have, because it swings back into a shift of that dynamic back into, these two groups of people who are picked with very pure intent, with high integrity and a history of humanities, and people who are full of selfless service. And that's the sort of people that move into these two groups that run the planet. And there's an end of political genders, international politics, and all of that, because those boundaries just dissolve while still respecting local cultural endeavours that maintain the identity of people in their own place. And the last one, the World Restoration Projects, and again, when the theory behind this is when this new group was swept to power, these people advocates and planetary advocates and people ambassadors, when they were swept to power, they went to the billionaires around the world and they said, well, you guys are responsible for restoring the planet now, and you're going to fund it. And you can donate half your wealth right now to settle that up, or you're going to lose all of it. So they all came on board pretty quick. And then where it went from there is anybody's guess. But there was almost limitless funds to run thousands upon thousands upon thousands of world restoration projects, whether they were infrastructure projects, economic projects, retraining of people, and millions of people are in these projects, and that's how they make their living. They're provided from this pool of funds that was taken from the billionaires around the world. And that's a beautiful thing. I'm sure Jeff Bezos would love this idea. So that's how we repaired the world. And these people are all telling the stories on how that was done.
I know Bill Gates and Warren Buffett are part of the collaborative who are moving in that direction. I don't know about Bezos, though, if he's on board yet.
Yeah.
Might take a little while. We hold the vision for him to be there, right?
Absolutely.
Now, have we asked all the questions that everybody and answered all the questions that anybody might have had? Let me pull this up into gallery view so I can see everybody. Does anybody have a question that they want to ask?
I've asked this before, Pete, but when is book 2 coming out? And so we know who those mysterious people and the who's behind the murders and the more kind of mundane stuff.
Well, Lee, there is another wall in the house that has paper on it now, and ideas are starting to pop on there as they go. It's sort of swirling around inside. Some of the hints that I can offer so far is there's a little bit more about Carlo and his backstory. He's a really interesting guy. He's an old Jungian analyst who found the metaphysical. And I've always been a big lover of Carl Jung and the work that he brought through with the collective unconscious and all of that, as you know. So there's a little bit more about Carlo. There will be the pursuit of free energy. Okay, and that's another one of the subjects in the last 5 subjects too, Carol, that free energy was made readily available to everybody. Solved the energy crisis, stopped the mining and the destroying of fossil fuels. So there'll be a little bit more of that. There'll be a bit more intrigue. So you will recall that there was a few things left undone about Celeste's father and his passing. So there'll be more on that. And I don't know, the work will continue and possibly expand, but where I take it yet hasn't really dropped on me yet. But I'm reserving time over Christmas just to sit and listen. So I'll probably know more after Christmas.
I love that you have some helpers from out there, and I'll be interested to see what themes they would like you to write about, or how they.
Absolutely. Well, I'm part of a team, so I've got to listen to the team.
That's wonderful, Pete. I'm on my
Thanks,
second read, really enjoying it. Not racing through it this time, and enjoying it even more.
I'm curious because certainly there's more than 8,000 people on the planet at this time doing this kind of work. So I'm wondering, and with the Maharishi effect, kind of as background, is the idea that we would all need to be kind of focusing on a really specific intention all at the same time to really see a movement, rather than all of the ways that we're out here in a million different directions trying to do to work to improve and be light workers.
Well, my view is that the kickstart in consciousness has already happened. Let's face it, we're having conversations like this and they're not burning us at the stake anymore. So, I think that shift has already occurred. And probably Greg Braden's book, The Divine Matrix, covers a little bit of this. If you want to sort of look into it a little bit more deeply, or Lynn McTabbitt's book, The Field. And I read those books and then researched it from there and put the info out. There's something about that dynamic, and I'm not quite sure how they came up with that formula. So I don't know the background behind it. And I've got to say, maths isn't my forte. Best leave that to others. So if you look at that in terms of that's just to kickstart the consciousness, that's not to change the world. That's to start the snowball heading down the slope. And I think the snowball's growing with every roll. And if I had to say how far is the snowball down the slope, I think we're still reasonably close to the top. But I think the slope is going to get a lot steeper, because what happens is these things, it's like the domino effect. It starts with just one domino and it knocks on another and another and another, and then it spreads out through all of the different avenues that it has. And I'm sure you've seen those videos of someone knocking over 10,000 dominoes, but towards the end, the rest of it just goes whoosh. And I think that if we use that analogy of the slope, we know that gravity is on our side as well. And snowballs don't roll uphill. Once they start downhill, they go all the way to the bottom and there's no stopping them. I actually think we're on that slope and we're starting to pick up speed. We're still up near the top, but we're starting to pick up speed. And I think the square root of the 8% is what pushed the snowball from the top in the first place. So I think we're on our way, and we can see the distress in the current systems on this planet that no longer suit the vibration of where we're heading. They're in disarray. Some are starting to fail. And I think their days are numbered. And that's when we step forward and we replace it with something that's full of light and not shadow. So I think it's game on.
Nice. Any other questions?
Tom's got a question.
Hi, Pete. Good to see you again. I joined you in your talk recently at the symposium.
Yeah, you were going to send me some info, Tom. I'm still waiting for that. Are you going to send that through?
I'm sorry. Well, if I can get your contact information, Carol, I certainly will do that.
Yeah, that'd be great. There was
John Hoffman.
Yeah, you really piqued my interest on that stuff you talked about at the symposium.
Well, I'll do that. You're in Canberra, is that right?
No, Cairns.
You're in Australia, right?
Yeah, in Cairns, up near the Barrier Reef.
Okay, so but you're something like 16 or 17 hours.
Yeah, I'm I'm doing tomorrow, and I'm really enjoying it. So I'm just going to put my email address into the thing here.
Oh, great. I'm trying, we have a very robust IONS community group here in Richmond. I'd love to have you as a guest speaker for one of our meetings. What I was worried about the time difference is that we meet from 10 a.m. to noon on Saturday morning once a month, and that would be in the middle of the night for you, unless you're a night owl, would be kind of difficult.
Yeah, I sort of my watch sort of is very adjustable, really, Tom.
Oh, great. Well, I'm
So
delighted to hear that.
we can chat offline about that.
All right, wonderful. Well, I will definitely be in touch. I appreciate
Okay.
it. Thank you.
Okay.
And I thoroughly enjoyed tonight. It was great.
Thank you.
As amazing as the book is, being able to have this one-on-one conversation with you just takes it to a whole nother level. So I can't thank you enough for everything that you shared with us, and how open you are to answer our questions. There's no question that is unimportant, because every time we ask a question, it's like what you were talking about, that we affect the universe, don't we?
We do indeed. Absolutely.
Yeah. So let me ask you one last question before we wind up, is what question, what intention, what thought would you like to put out to the universe tonight, and that we can help hold the energy for?
When that snowball reaches the bottom of the slope and it hits the bottom of that slope, and it just spreads in every direction. And every one of those snowflakes is filled with light. And we are the snowflakes in the ball. So, yeah, just spread the light, because, let's not focus on the shadows. Let's be those snowflakes that spread the light as we hit the bottom of that slope and spread in every direction.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Okay. Wow. And Smita, I think you had a comment or question?
Yeah, I don't have any questions, but I just wanted to share with Pete that about a year ago, maybe a year and a half ago, I worked with a lady who's in her 70s, and she was feeling this sense of not having done enough. And she just wanted to know what more she needed to do in this lifetime, how many more ways she could serve, because she really comes with that mindset of wanting to do more. She's a light worker. And so when I regressed her, as it happens with many of my clients, she didn't go into a past life. She went to a Pleiadian ship. And she found that she was a scientist on the Pleiadian ship who was doing research on what kind of plants to grow on Earth that would be beneficial for the soil and all of us. And, initially in my interview with her, she had told me about this deep interest she has in organic food and growing food and all of that. It was really amazing, the details that she shared about her life on the ship, and that the ship has labs where they're growing these plants. And the way they are creating food is so incredibly healthy and clean. And so after the session, I said, well, how are you feeling now? She said, I'm not feeling the weight anymore, the weight of what more do I have to do? Because I feel like a part of me is already doing that work. And I can now connect to her. And so she started to feel so much better about just doing whatever she's doing in this lifetime. But I always feel like there's so much. It's so beautiful to meet other aspects of yourself and see how you could be working together. And there's
Yeah.
somewhere where all that is coming together for each one of us. So that was one I wanted to share with you. And the other thing was that my guides have been saying for a while now that the direction we all need to be moving into is the direction of collaboration.
Yeah.
And so today I heard you say that, and it just feels like such a resonance. This is why I nudged Carol to collaborate with me on the symposium. And I felt the urge to connect with more people in the hypnotherapy community, because I feel like each one of us has these beautiful gifts, and it's time to start putting our energies together. So just feeling that really strongly. And you are
Yeah.
so inspiring,
Thank you.
in so many ways. So really appreciate all that you've shared with us today.
Thanks, Smita. I mean, there's this whole thing about us coming together with others, and if you got a drop of rain falls on you, and you hardly feel it, but if you get hit by a wave at the beach, it'll knock you over. So we're stronger together when all of us as particles come together and create a wave, and that's where we can take the planet. I'd love that story about the Pleiadian ship. That's a beautiful one. Yeah.
So in the expansion of consciousness, do you feel like as we move beyond the physical, that connecting with our off-world brothers and sisters will be more prevalent?
Some of the research that we've done through Institute for Quantum Consciousness, I've come to the conclusion that our off-world brethren in many cases are us already, and that we are incarnating here and there at the same time. And I've had a lot of clients who have talked about, I'm part of a group consciousness, I've incarnated here because I'm the boots on the ground. So my take is that the way to change a planet, Smita's example of that client is a good one. They're actually in the Pleiadian ship, but part of that consciousness is here in her client that's now been awakened through that journey. So I think we are the universal beings, and I think we are bringing change. And this is behind a lot of the new kids coming through. This is about, they don't fit the old system, so they invent this thing called the spectrum, and they medicate the kids and all that sort of stuff. I mean, all of that is just a new wiring for humanity, and people like Mary Rodwell in my country is working with those families to help the parents understand that their kids are not from here. So, there's more and more of the cosmic and galactic influences that are coming through into our daily lives. And, we're awakening to that. And it's time for us to become the collective citizens that we are. I mean, they're from Earth, they're not from Earth. I mean, it's all a universe. I mean, we're already cosmic. We're already out there in the universe. That's what Earth is.
So tell us a little bit about your upcoming events. I think your November class is full, but the February class is open.
Yeah, February's about half full now. This is the Quantum Consciousness Facilitator training, which goes for 5 days. We work first couple of days with the multiverse and other versions of ourselves. The last 3 days is about the quantum consciousness experience, and that's going up through different realms of consciousness, like I was speaking about earlier. February's about half full now. We can only take 12. So if people are interested, just make contact and we can talk more from there. The big change for February is that we used to do 5 days in a row, but from feedback and from our own thoughts, we're now going to do 2 days one weekend and 3 the next, to give people a break in between. We're getting a lot of people that are coming to the courses from Europe and places like that, and 5 nights in a row starting at midnight is just not good for them. So we're actually going to break up the February course into a 2-day, 3-day split.
Well, I just want to say thank you again so much for writing your book, first of all, What a fun book to read and so inspiring. And I hope my words in the beginning that it becomes a movie come true, and
Yeah.
it will make a smashing movie. So let's put that from what do they say, from my lips to God's ears,
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
make that happen. And
Uh,
thank you again so much. Can we give Peter a nice round of applause? Yay.
Thanks, guys. And can I thank you, Carol, for what you're doing? I mean, the events that you're putting together with Smita and Tiffany helping out with that as well. I mean, you're bringing some great stuff forward. It's just fantastic. You know, this book doesn't get to people without a forum for these conversations. So by offering that, you're helping to spread the light. And, you know, you guys are doing such a wonderful job. This has got such a nice energy to it. Really,
Yes.
really, thank you for what you're doing.
You know, a lot of people think that Zoom rooms are impersonal, but for some reason, every time we do a group, there is such a warmth to it that I feel it, and I know other people have told me the same thing. So I feel like it's our collective energy that wants to build this kind of community that, whether we knew it or not, we're writing on the tails of what you're writing about.